This is the fraction review, part 9. We are talking about adding and subtracting fractions that do not have the same denominator. And we're supposed to write our answers in lowest terms. There are a lot of different ways to find a common denominator. Some involve prime factorization, like we talked about earlier. What I'm going to show you is what I think is probably the easiest way to get it done. It takes some paper, it takes a little bit of patience. Easiest is not always the quickest, okay? With practice, you'll get these down very quickly. It'll just take a little while, okay? So what I'm looking for here, if I'm looking at my denominators, I have 8 and 12, and they're not the same. So I can't just add them right now. I need to make these the same thing. So what you want to do is you want to start off with your larger denominator, which is 12, okay? And then ask yourself, does this number divide evenly into this? Does 8 divide evenly into 12? And if you're not sure, use your calculator. 12 divided by 8, if I get a decimal, ugly decimal, it doesn't divide in evenly. It doesn't work. Okay, so I tried 12. The next thing you want to do is you want to take this and you multiply it by 2, which will give me 24. And then repeat the process. Does 8 divide evenly into 24? And it does. So 24 is my LCD. Now imagine for a second that it didn't work. If 8 did not divide evenly into 24, my next step would be 12 times 3, and then I would see if it worked. And then 12 times 4, and then 12 times 5, and so on, until I find the first number that works. You could start with 8 and do 8 times 2 and see if it works, 8 times 3 and see if it works. You're just going to get your answer more quickly if you start off with your larger denominator. That's all. So since both of these, I can easily multiply by something to turn it into 24, that's what I'm going to do. Remember, on the very first part, we talked about how this rule works in both directions. We've been starting off with something like this and reducing them. Now we're going to start off with something like this and multiply top and bottom by something to change it into something else. So we're finally using that rule in reverse. 8 times 3 gives me 24. So I need to multiply this by a 3 to make it into 24, but to do that, I also need to multiply the top by a 3. On this side, 12 times 2 gives me 24. So I have to multiply the top by a 2 as well. 3 over 3 is a 1. I'm multiplying by 1, so I'm not fundamentally changing the value of the number. Same thing's happening here. I'm multiplying by a 1. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times 8 is 24. Plus 7 times 2 is 14. 2 times 12 is 24. Now I have a common denominator, so I can add across the top, keep the denominator the same, and 15 plus 14 would be 29 over 24. That is an improper fraction, but it is in lowest terms. So if you're allowed to give an improper fraction as your answer, that will work. If they ask you to change it into a mixed number, 24 divides into 29. It goes in one time with 5 left over. So it would be 1 and 5 over 24. Depends on what answer they want, what they're looking for. Okay, so let's try this one. We're starting off with mixed numbers, which means we want to change them into improper fractions. So do around the world first. 5 times 3 is 15. 15 plus 1 would be 16. So that's 16 fifths. 2 times 2 would be 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. So this is minus 5 halves. Okay? Now we do not have a common denominator. So we start off with our largest one. Just 2 divide evenly into 5? No. So we tried 5. It didn't work. 5 times 2 is 10. Does 2 divide into 10? Yes. So 10 is my least common denominator. So I wanted to turn both of these into a 10. So I multiplied this by a 2 to get a 10. So I have to multiply this by 2 as well. And then to change the 2 into a 10, I multiply it by a 5. So multiply it by 5 as well. So this becomes 32 over 10 minus 25 over 10. Now, 32 minus 25 is 7. So what I'm doing here is 32 minus 25 over 10, which will be 7 over 10. 7/10 would be your answer. Okay, so let's do one more problem before we go on to the very last part of this review. Here I have 3 fractions, and it's an addition and a subtraction, and I want to find a common denominator for all of these. Okay, so I'm looking for a number that all of these work with. So you start off with your largest one, which is a 6. 3 divides evenly into 6, so that works for these two. 6 works for these two. 6 and 2 also work because 2 divides evenly into 6 as well. So 6 is my LCD. I'm not going to need to change that fraction, but these two I do. So this I need to multiply by a 2, and this by 2 as well to get a 6. This one I would need to multiply by a 3, because that's going to give me a 6 in the denominator. So I rewrite this problem as 22 over 6 plus 1 over 6 minus 3 over 6. And now that they all have a common denominator, I have 22 plus 1 minus 3 over 6. 23 minus 3 would be 20 over 6. Now, not only is this an improper fraction and they might want a mixed number, but it is also not in lowest terms because both of these are divisible by a 2. So I need to divide these by a 2 no matter what. Even if we're asked to go to a mixed number, I still need to divide these by 2 to get 10 over 3. Now, if they accept an improper fraction as your answer, 10 over 3 would be your answer. If not, 3 divides into 10 3 times with 1 left over. So this would be the same as 3 1/3. Okay. Now we are going to work just one more problem in the final part.